Welcome to the debate. When a godlike fascist finally achieves literal immortality, how does one actually defeat him? Does one rely on brute force, or do we exploit the one human variable he simply cannot comprehend, which is, of course, irrational love?
Well, that is certainly the agonizing question we are left wrestling with, particularly when the broadcasters decides to pivot so drastically and dreadfully in its final hours.
A drastic pivot, yes, but a transcendent one. We are diving deep into the penultimate installment of The Boys Season 5, Episode 7, titled The Frenchman, the Female, and the Man Called Mother's Milk, which aired just 2 days ago on May 13th, 2026. And just to set the board for our listeners, Homelander has successfully taken the V1 compound from Soldier Boy.
Yes, he has transcended mere invulnerability to achieve true physical immortality.
Exactly. Which means the much-sought-after superhero virus is now entirely useless against him. We are plunged into a truly apocalyptic endgame.
In theory, yes. The pieces for an apocalypse are on the table gathering dust while the narrative indulges in utter nonsense.
Right. Well, that brings us to the core disagreement we will be unpacking today. Does this penultimate hour masterfully elevate the series' stakes by focusing on intimate character tragedies and the triumph of irrational emotion over logic? Or, as I know you are absolutely desperate to argue, does it suffer from a structural collapse, sacrificing narrative urgency for bloated subplots?
It is barely an argument at this point. The viewer backlash we are seeing is entirely justified when you look at the ghastly mechanics of what actually ended up on our screens. I am baffled by the critical acclaim. IGN giving this an 8 out of 10 is frankly a joke.
Well, let us lay out our positions clearly. I am taking the stance that this broadcast is a narrative triumph. It uses absurd cognitive dissonance and emotional sacrifice to brilliantly deconstruct the concept of absolute power.
And I look at this exact same hour of television and see a narrative that egregiously, embarrassingly loses its apocalyptic momentum. It is utterly bogged down by frustrating pacing, unearned sentimentality, and frankly, vacuous franchise crossover filler.
I want to start right in the thick of that supposed loss of momentum, because I know you took major issue with the tonal whiplash in the first act. We have this horrifying sequence where Homelander physically crushes President Calhoun's head.
A genuinely arresting scene, I'll admit.
A brutal display of raw power that establishes these terrifying freedom camps. But then, immediately after that, we transition into the Democratic Church of America rebrand, featuring a 40-take musical number of "Oh Father," led by David Diggs. Walk me through why you find that so offensive to your sensibilities.
Because it completely shatters the immersion. We are witnessing the literal death of American democracy. The stakes have never been higher. And yet, we are forced to pause all forward momentum to watch David Diggs, clad in a grotesquely heavy costume, channeling James Brown in a profanity-laced gospel pastiche.
But musically, it is incredibly rich.
Oh, technically impressive, sure. The choreography is fine, but structurally, it is a catastrophic distraction. One does not construct a terrifying theocratic fascist state and then immediately defang that very real terror with an extended slapstick musical sequence. It betrays a fundamental lack of narrative discipline.
I completely reject that. I understand why you might reflexively recoil from the shift, but the cognitive dissonance you felt is a deliberate, masterful feature of the writing. By rebranding the evangelical group into this garish, Democratic Church of America, the show's making a profound point. Authoritarianism is by its very nature inherently absurd.
Absurd, yes, but it shouldn't be pedestrian sitcom fodder.
It isn't sitcom fodder. Think about Homelander banning the United States Constitution in the exact same breath that he bans nut milk and baby formula. That perfectly encapsulates his dangerously fragile man-child psychology. It's brilliant.
I see the psychological angle you are desperately trying to validate. But combining the banning of the Constitution with legislation against almond milk reduces genuine political terror to an internet meme. It shrinks a godlike threat down to a petty troll.
But that is what fascists are. They are insecure trolls with power.
Regardless, it bleeds the tension right out of the room. And this bizarre reliance on absurdity over logic brings us directly to Sister Sage. If we are discussing narrative discipline, we absolutely must talk about how the smartest woman in the world is suddenly reduced to making elementary miscalculations.
Ah, you are referring to her 87% miscalculation regarding Soldier Boy?
Exactly. She calculates there's an 87% probability that Soldier Boy will reject Homelander out of sheer ego when shown the footage of Homelander's relationship with Stormfront. But she fails entirely. Soldier Boy hands over the V1 formula anyway. It is an incredibly contrived mechanical shortcut.
Oh, what a remarkably pedestrian read of that scene. I look at that exact moment and see the thesis of the entire series crystallizing. Why does her intellect fail? Because her algorithm cannot compute love.
Love? Oh, please.
Yes, love. Soldier Boy hands it over out of a residual, deeply twisted love for Clara, for Stormfront. Sage operates on statistics but human nuance. Even the dark, toxic nuance of Soldier Boy shatters superhero sociopathy. The episode beautifully reinforces this exact theme later on with Marvin T. Milk.
Oh, you mean that interminable exposition dump regarding his nickname?
I would hardly call it an exposition dump. MM finally confesses to Starlight that Mother's Milk isn't some tribute to maternal strength. It is a childhood slur. A gang of bullies mocked his natural instinct to care for an injured bird. It reframes his entire existence.
It essentially stops the plot cold. I won't deny that reclaiming a slur is a potent thematic idea, but how are these supposed human elements executed? They are drowning in franchise-building filler.
Franchise building? I suppose you're talking about the Gen V integration.
Obviously. We are hurtling toward an apocalypse, and suddenly Marie Moreau and Jordan Lee are unceremoniously paraded onto the screen. Why? Simply to deliver clunky exposition about, oh, father's studio visits, only to be immediately brushed off by Starlight. It serves the corporate synergy of Amazon Prime, nothing more.
It is vital world building. It reminds us that the resistance is generational. But, I know your critique of filler extends to the deep storyline this week, and there I have to strongly, vehemently disagree.
How could you possibly defend the narrative cul-de-sac of the deep? In the midst of a global crisis, we are dragged away to watch the deep being rejected by Xander, the hammerhead shark. And yes, having Samuel L. Jackson voice a CGI fish is a very clever meta-textual wink to Deep Blue Sea, but it is entirely vacuous.
Vacuous? Are we watching the same broadcast?
The marine world rejects him for his complicity in Black Noir's oil spill, and then he simply sits on a beach. 20 minutes of screen time stolen from the impending apocalypse so we can watch a man pout in the sand?
That pouting is the absolute poetic distillation of Vought's systemic failure. He is completely stripped of his last remaining illusion of purpose, exiled from corporate society, exiled from the natural world, and what does he do? He stands on a beach, drinking a beer, watching an innocent man drown, and he does nothing.
Exactly my point. He does nothing. It goes nowhere.
The nothing is the entire point. Vought took a man who could communicate with the oceans and turned him into a paralyzed brand ambassador. It is a haunting tragedy that underscores how corporate commodification rots the soul. It is the thematic thesis statement of the opposition.
Pausing to admire the thematic tragedy of a tertiary character while the world ends feels staggeringly indulgent. Just as indulgent as the grotesque revelation of Ashley Barrett's powers.
Back Ashley. The physical manifestation of a repressed conscience. I thought it was sublime.
Sublime. It was juvenile. We have this secondary face growing out of the back of her head, hiding beneath a wig, berating her. And then, oh, how convenient, this tumorous second face proves capable of reading O Father's heavily guarded mind when even Sister Sage could not. It is farce. Pure farce.
It is the exteriorization of internal corporate complicity. Using body horror to explore character psychology is exactly what this genre is built for. But I sense we are going to remain entirely at odds regarding the surrealist elements, so let us move to the emotional fulcrum of the hour. Surgeon Kimiko in the zinc-lined vent.
Ah, yes. Let us discuss the show's absolute, irredeemable betrayal of its source material, Frenchie's death.
A necessary evolution, not a betrayal.
If we look at the dark roots of the original comic books, the true horror stems from the fact that Billy Butcher, descending into utter villainy, shockingly murders Frenchie. It proves Butcher has become the monster. What we received on screen, however, was a saccharine, romanticized melodrama wrapped in radiation burns.
You are entirely dismissing the thematic necessity of granting Frenchie his agency. By having Frenchie choose to step into that uranium chamber, the narrative provides the ultimate counterargument to Billy Butcher's descent into monstrosity.
I am dismissing the staggering contrivance required to get us there.
If I might finish, look at Butcher in this exact episode. He is utilizing Compound V tentacles to brutally murder the telepath's synapse. He's hallucinating Joe Kessler, who is actively egging him on to commit atrocities. Butcher is surrendering his humanity. Frenchie, in stark contrast, chooses a selfless act.
And we are expected to believe that Homelander, an immortal god, conveniently arrives at the laboratory only to be momentarily spooked by a burst of radiation so he can flee. He runs away simply to afford Frenchie a lingering final moment to murmur in French to Kimiko as his internal organs liquefy? It is embarrassing.
I will push back on the mechanics of that scene because it works brilliantly. Why does Homelander run? Because even as an immortal, he is fundamentally a coward. He doesn't know how to handle physical discomfort. And beyond that psychological masterstroke, doesn't Frenchie's sacrifice serve a vital functional purpose in the plot?
You mean besides illuminating the room with a radioactive glow?
I mean, completing Kimiko's radiation process. He manually triggers the raw uranium core because it is the only way to transform her into the ultimate depowering weapon. He knows Homelander's X-ray vision cannot penetrate the zinc vent. This emotional beat is physically necessary to set the board against Homelander.
The show weaponizes sentimentality. Sister Sage observes this sacrifice, and we are led to believe this single act of love completely shatters her worldview. The smartest woman in the world is suddenly struck dumb by a tragic romance. It lacks all courage.
Is a profound elevation of the material. It argues that cold statistics cannot account for the unpredictable nature of the human spirit.
Relying on the human spirit as a plot device is agonizingly pedestrian. And it's not just the sentimentality, it's the pop culture winks that shatter any remaining immersion.
I presume you are referring to the confrontation with Soldier Boy.
Naturally. Soldier Boy is locked in a tense confrontation with his son, Homelander. Homelander is desperately seeking affection, and Soldier Boy rejects him by stating, "This will never be tossing a ball on the lawn or fixing up an old Impala," a blatantly transparent reference to the showrunner's previous series, Supernatural.
Which is a clever Easter egg. It underscores Soldier Boy's emotional illiteracy. He can only express rejection through outdated hypermasculine tropes.
It breaks the fourth wall right when we need to be fully immersed in Homelander's trauma. It's a writer aggressively elbowing the viewer in the ribs, and the result? Homelander throws his father back into a cryogenic stasis chamber out of sheer petulance, removing a major player from the board purely out of narrative convenience.
It isn't convenience. It perfectly illustrates the cyclical nature of abuse within Vought's paradigm. Homelander inflicts the exact same freezing torture on his father that originally drove Soldier Boy mad. It is generational trauma made literal. But look, as we look toward the final hour, titled Blood and Bone.
A rather heavy-handed callback.
A brilliant callback to Season 3's prophecy. Regardless, we must agree on one undeniable fact. The board is now immaculately and dangerously set for the end.
I will concede that the pieces are finally in place, despite the agonizingly clumsy manner in which they were arranged. Kimiko is irradiated and weaponized, Butcher has fully surrendered to his monstrous, tentacled impulses, and Soldier Boy is frozen, leaving our protagonists with severely depleted resources. The tension, I suppose, is there.
Exactly. And the mysteries that remain to be resolved are incredibly tantalizing. Will Ryan's ultimate loyalty fall to his biological father or to the memory of Butcher's genuine paternal care? Will Sister Sage deploy her formidable intellect to dismantle Homelander's empire from within? And of course, the rumors regarding an airborne mutation of the virus.
Which terrifies me, Because if we are subjected to an airborne virus simply to force a twisted sacrifice from Butcher, I fear we are in for an even clumsier finale than the catastrophe we just witnessed.
Well, our discourse today clearly highlights the sheer complexity and polarizing nature of this broadcast. We aren't going to declare a winner between our perspectives today. The listener will have to decide for themselves whether this penultimate chapter was a brilliant philosophical pivot or a pacing misstep.
I suspect a second viewing might clarify things for many, though certainly not in the broadcast's favor.
We shall see. We leave you with this thought to mull over before the finale. If absolute, invincible power renders physical conflict meaningless, is our capacity for irrational, selfless love our greatest vulnerability, or our only true superpower? Thank you for listening to the debate.